This video is from the Chemistry of Life section, looking at cellular respiration. From the cellular respiration diagrams page, let's first look at overall reactions. The whole purpose of cellular respiration is to produce ATP. ATP is a form of cellular energy. It's a molecule, adenosine triphosphate. The way ATP is formed is from breaking the bonds in glucose. This creates a form that cells can use, so cellular energy, like a currency. Cellular energy is necessary for things like active transport. Active transport is when we move molecules against a concentration gradient. And active transport occurs anytime we're using our nervous system. So if we have to move muscles at all, active transport is required to get our nervous system to work. So any muscle contraction. And energy is also required for the process of phagocytosis. And some of your immune cells do that. Cellular respiration occurs in the presence of oxygen. Oxygen is necessary for cellular respiration to go to completion. This is because in the presence of oxygen, what happens is an oxidation of electron carriers. These electron carriers are molecules that carry high energy electrons. They are NADH and FADH2. These are the molecules that are electron carriers. The overall reaction for cellular respiration has three parts. If we start on the far left with glucose, the first part of the reaction is going to break glucose apart. This section is called glycolysis, the splitting of glucose. This reaction, the splitting of glucose, happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. So we're not in any organelle yet, and it's not necessary to have any oxygen. So this reaction is anaerobic, no oxygen necessary. What happens is that glucose splits through enzyme use, and that produces 2 ATP. As glucose is ripped apart, electrons in high energy are transferred to electron carrier molecules. So we have 2 NADH molecules being formed. What comes out of a glycolysis reaction is a 3-carbon sugar called pyruvate. Pyruvate is a toxic molecule. So there are two things that can happen here. This toxicity means that pyruvate needs to be removed immediately. If there is no oxygen present, so in an anaerobic condition, this is a different pathway. This pathway is called fermentation. Fermentation happens in different organisms differently. We could have alcoholic fermentation that occurs in yeast. We could have fermentation that occurs in mussels, and that's lactic acid fermentation. So from glucose to pyruvate is glycolysis. Next, if pyruvate does have oxygen presence, it can continue. This continuation is a conversion of the pyruvate molecule into a bridge reaction here, forming a molecule called acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA has access into the Krebs cycle. When pyruvate is modified, again electron carriers are formed, 2 NADH molecules. Acetyl-CoA can now get into the next phase, the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle, also known as the citric acid cycle, happens inside the mitochondria, specifically in the mitochondrial matrix. The matrix is all the way in the middle. Because acetyl-CoA has a reaction that releases carbon dioxide, oxygen was necessary. So this is an aerobic reaction requiring oxygen. So the Krebs cycle needs oxygen, but glycolysis does not. Acetyl-CoA is modified through the Krebs cycle, and all of the carbon is finally ripped off. What we get is 2 ATP molecules in this shredding. We get 6 NADH molecules, so those are electron carriers. And here's where the new electron carrier we haven't seen yet comes in. 2 FADH2s are also made in the Krebs cycle. When the Krebs cycle finishes, we have high energy electron carriers that we intend to oxidize in the final phase. This final phase is the oxidation of electron carriers, because that's all that's left. And this happens in the what we abbreviate as ETC, or electron transport chain. This electron transport chain is embedded in the membrane, the folding membrane of the mitochondria. So it occurs in the intermembrane space. And because oxygen is the final electron acceptor in the reaction of cellular respiration, it is very much aerobic, or requiring oxygen. What happens in this phase is that all the NADH, the electrons are ripped off, and as they go through, they form ATP. So for every 1 NADH, we get 3 ATP molecules, and for every 1 FADH2, we get 2 ATP molecules. What happens is a grand total of 36 ATP molecules. So the 3 phases, glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain, seek to oxidize the electrons that are ripped off of glucose, intermediarily transferred to electron carrier molecules, where the electrons are finally accepted by oxygen in the electron transport chain, producing lots of cellular energy.